Thank you, everyone. Whilst we're waiting for people to join us, if you're not presenting, can you please ensure your camera is off and your microphone is muted? Thank you. And again, we're just waiting for colleagues to join us. If you're not presenting, we'd appreciate if you could turn your camera off and mute your microphone. Thank you. We'll be commencing in a minute or so, so could I have the next slide, please?
I'm having some Teams gremlins, Sunny. So just to check, can you see the housekeeping slide okay?
We can,
Good.
Thank you.
Right. I can see the slides here, but I can't see that you can see them. So fingers crossed.
Thank you. I think we're going to make a move as starters colleagues are joining us. As colleagues join, we'd appreciate if you could turn your camera off and keep your microphones muted as well, please. Right, let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. I think we've bumped on, but welcome everybody to day 4 of Psychological Professions Week. I'm really pleased today that we are sharing a piece of work that we're doing in the Midlands around skills transfer. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kalsy-Lillico and I'm the chair of PPN Midlands, and I'm joined today by James Varty, who's our programme manager and apparently is the one that's having the Teams issues, and Nicola Glover, who is our project support officer and is managing all of the behind the scenes work today. As you see from our slide, there's we are a big team, so there are lots of individuals that are involved that enable us to be able to do our very best to ensure that the network works across the East and West Midlands. Next slide, please, James. Just to remind you that we are in, as I said, day 4 of Psychological Professionals Week. And I hope that you've been able to dip in and out for a number of the sessions that we've had during the week. All of the presentations will be available on our PPN website, so don't fear if there's anything that you have missed. And there's been some fantastic pieces of work that have looked at both workforce and practice. Next slide, please. Now, you may be aware that psychological professions in England have a vision that is based around a very core fundamental belief, which is to transform lives and communities by extending and embedding psychological knowledge and practice across the whole of health and care. And the drivers for that are wonderfully illustrated in this graphic with our planets. Each one of those planets has a set of commitments and a set of actions that guide and drive our workforce plan across England, and so that we are enabled, to connect not only the policy imperatives that we work towards, but also actively are working to make sure that we are improving the psychological professionals workforce and the psychological practice that our communities access in and around England. Today's session on psychological skills transfer actually lent itself beautifully to our wonderful yellow planet. So the next slide, please, which is linked to transform and innovate. This is essentially our planet that's focusing on how we use our evidence and expertise to improve what we actually do. And what we are sharing with you today is a piece of work that was started back in 2015 that probably drifted for a while through all of the changes that we've had across policies and structures within the Midlands. And actually, though, has some traction in some of the imperatives that services are dealing with now. So on to the next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about psychological skills transfer, a programme of work that has been led by our programme manager, James Varty, and supported by a number of stakeholder colleagues across the East and West Midlands, and one of whom is present with us today, who's Paul Edwards, who is our expert by experience and has been a grounding voice, I think, in all of this work going forward. Next slide, please. As colleagues are joining us, just a reminder, if you could please turn your cameras off whilst the presentation is going on. The psychological skills transfer project that we are talking about was actually part and parcel of a wider piece of work that took place in the West Midlands region circa 2014-2015 under the auspices of an acronym called PROMPT, which stands for Psychological Research on Meaningful and Purposeful Training. This project was the output of one of the very first West Midlands Health Education England region-wide programmes, which was set up to upskill practitioners across the mental health workforce. And it was commissioned through, I think at the time, the only Mental Health Institute's local education training council in England. We were one of the only regions in England that actually had developed a mental health focused local education training council. This council was made up of a collaboration of the West Midlands mental health and learning disability providers. So it was a real precursor, one of the first collaborative pieces of work that was driven through policy and supported through structures in the Midlands. One of the core things that came out of this piece of work, which was very much designed around the mental health care clusters and systems and structures, was a notion or a fundamental process around skills transfer that was based around, if you were going to upskill any practitioner in a series of skills, that there needs to be a consideration about how those skills transfer from learning into practice. The skills transfer element of this programme remains relevant for the expansion of psychological practice and upskilling, particularly linked to some core programmes that we are involved in, linked to psychological therapies for severe mental health problems and conditions, plus other areas as well. The intention around our project, though, is to share with you how we've got to a place where we were at risk of losing this resource, and how we've been able to preserve it and hopefully share it in a way that is going to be of impact to you all. James, I'm going to hand over to you for the rest of the slides. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sunny, and hello, everyone. I'll just give a little bit more of a background to the project. Sunny's given a very clear explanation as to where it's arisen from. Just to give some additional context to the background of this project. The prompt project resulted in some materials which were kind of held as a resource on the Health Education England website. And as many of you will be aware, Health Education England has merged with NHS England and become the Workforce Training and Education Directorate within it. So that was one of the key drivers to preserving the content. We had this legacy embedded website that was sat on the HEE website as an embedded website. And as Sunny has said, we want the imperative was to retain the skills transfer element. That was the real kind of driver for this project. And that's because of the significant workforce expansion and the continued relevance of the skills transfer element to upskilling, and sharing that good practice that came from the original prompt project. So in terms of the long-term plan, I'll bring you in, Paul. I know you're involved in a talk tomorrow around the long-term plan, so that was something you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing a talk. I'm honoured to be one of 3 experts by experience who are talking with Adrian Whittington tomorrow about the long-term plan. But I think for me, it's really important to first and foremost thank every single one of you in the profession from the bottom of our hearts, because without you, we would not be in the situation to be able to give our lived experience input into this. And I think the key point for me was remembering that it's not just the psychologists, the clinical psychologists. It's about everybody in the psychological welfare of the profession, and that goes from the very base where we first walk through the door all the way up to when we've finished our treatment and we've left it. And I think it's important to understand it's a massive pool of people that we're trying to reach. And that was one of those things that was difficult when we were looking at it, how to reach all these different factors. And hopefully we've gone some way to do that. But again, it's just the heartfelt thanks for everybody who is going to use this to improve the lives of many people.
Thanks very much, Paul. And Paul, did you want to give a bit of an overview of your background? Because as well as being involved in many different work streams, it might be helpful for listeners to be aware about where you're coming from with your perspective. Yeah,
thank you. It's very difficult to blow your own trumpet when you've got mental health conditions. But my background firstly, I was a detective in the police for over 25 years, and I worked on serious crime. But unfortunately, due to work that I had to do within that role, I got PTSD. And having reached out post-retirement, I was lucky enough to find what was called my local IAP service then. And moving on from that, I reaching to a point where my recovery in my own brain was to a point that I could function again. I wanted to try and give something back. So I started volunteering at my local service. And from then, what I think is important, and I like to call it the kitchen conversations with people, made me realise there was probably an aspect of the service that I could assist with in just how does the patient view what's going on from the other side. And that's been really enriching, because I've gone in the last 7 years from that volunteering role to working, speaking with university students, to be involved with talking therapies, to be involved with the PPN, with a lot of other wonderful lived experience people within the country who do a great lot of work. But my passion is still just remembering how can I improve the lives of those people we're speaking to, and that's my biggest, probably my biggest takeout to you guys. Remember that how you're improving your own skills is going to improve the lives of many people, not just the person sitting opposite you, but their friends and family and colleagues. So it's just important to sometimes remember how impactful you are on the patient and the fact you can transform their lives.
Thanks very much, Paul. That's really important to highlight, and we can illustrate how we've built that into the program as we go through the presentation. So the imperative was to retain this program, to share best practice and create a more psychologically informed, or remembering that creating a more psychologically informed NHS isn't limited to the psychological professions, or upskilling in other members of the workforce such as nurses, occupational therapists, and the whole range of clinical roles is really important. And the day we had yesterday at the main conference day in London was very much about embedding psychological practice in physical healthcare. And it's important to recognise that the work we've done here with skills transfer is broader than just the mental health workforce. It spans right the way across all of healthcare. So the skills transfer model is universal. So that was one of the other really relevant kind of reasons why we wanted to retain it in some form. Okay, so the first step we took with our project was to identify stakeholders to advise and support with content development. So we put out a call to our colleagues through PPN regional networks, and also to our Midlands membership directly, to try and engage people who would be willing to help us revise the content. And we arrived at a core stakeholder group, and also had some additional ad hoc contributions from others. One of the challenges with work like this is getting people to be able to meet at the same time with their busy calendars, and with a number of our stakeholders being part-time workers as well, that just added to the challenge. But we were fortunate to give the call out and get some people involved who were really useful in shaping the content. And I know there's a few people on the call today, so you know who you are, and thanks very much for your input. The stakeholder group, the core group, was Paul, Anne Crawford-Doherty, Judith Bond, Anne Detheridge, who's on the call with us today. Thanks, Anne. And Anne, Judith, and Anne were involved in the original prompt project, which was again a real bonus for us to have 3 clinical psychologists and leaders within their respective trusts, who were also involved in the original project and had kind of taken that work forward and seen how it had been sort of evolved over time. And we were joined by Rachel Bradley, who's the South Yorkshire workforce lead for psychological professionals. So although we had a small group, a small core group, we had a breadth of experience there, with Paul's watchful eye as well to kind of keep us on track with making sure that things made sense. We had a good starting point. I'm getting an echo. Has someone got there? There we are. It's gone. Thanks. So we if I go on to the next slide, we worked through the original 3-stage skills transfer model, and we kind of reflected on its continued relevance. Sunny mentioned that this was a project that was kind of wrapped up in 2015, 2016, and since then there's been developments across trusts and systems which have influenced the continued relevance of some parts of it, and also the fact that you know, all of the stakeholders had been running, or those involved with the original prompt project had been running those kind of ideas within their respective trusts, and there'd been some learning that they could add, and help shape from where the original model was developed, you know, to further shape the content with the experiences that they'd brought. And fundamentally, what we're looking at here is we wanted to capture all of the factors that influence what works in transferring skills learned in the classroom and in training into practical application with patients. And this isn't limited to any particular, you know, person within that kind of learning situation. It, you know, this is a course that will, well, a program that will support learners themselves. It will support supervisors, managers, leaders, you know, the whole range of people involved in workforce transformation, you know, to help them understand more how they can optimize the potential for psychological skills to be properly transferred and embedded effectively in different environments. And many of the you know, the content, much of the content within the program is, when you really think through it, is very common sense, but you'd be surprised how often it isn't being done. And I guess, you know, with the emergence of new roles coming into the psychological professions, and, you know, with introducing upskilling within physical health as well, so people who aren't necessarily trained in psychological practice, you know, there's going to be new managers, supervisors, and leaders who are having to manage psychological practice. And they need to know what the you know, the prerequisites and the, you know, the good practice is that supports effective transfer. And essentially, what we're looking at really is a shared responsibility between the learner, the higher education institution that's involved in training them. But perhaps arguably the most significant partner there is the employing NHS trusts. You know, so the learner's manager, their supervisor, the wider team, all the way up to the senior leadership within their trust, and then also the ICB that their trust is operating within. So all of those wider stakeholders, you know, understanding what is required to help someone become an effective therapist is kind of what we're looking at here. So there needs to be a recognition that there's a load of factors, and hopefully we've kind of reflected that within our program. So the stakeholder group kind of worked in a way which was a collaborative kind of iterative development using Google Docs and Google Sheets, because of the time constraints that we had in trying to get this program rapidly kind of turned around. I think we were perhaps over ambitious at the start when we wanted to have it. We started in early in the new year and wanted to have it done by the end of March, early April. It was just really unrealistic for it to be turned around in that time with all of the change that was happening across the systems. But we used remote working tools to collaborate remotely and independently on the kind of the different kind of script elements that we had. We undertook a review of the literature. The main thing that we kind of noted from the literature was you know, since 2015, nothing much had changed with the core kind of concepts around, you know, learning theory, but there'd been an emergence of blended learning approaches, particularly due to COVID, which there were some interesting kind of papers that we drew from around the blended learning approaches that could help maximize skills transfer. So what we did as a group was try to group the concepts and ideas within the original skills transfer model, expand them into more kind of illustrative kind of text where we could. And then the idea was that we'd procure instructional designers to support us with taking that further with an e-learning course. And we developed a program script based around those three fundamental stages. We looked at different options for how we were going to present the content, and we didn't want to have the traditional kind of talking heads with with professionals kind of talking to camera. We felt that using animated content would give the program greater longevity, so it wasn't tied to any individuals or particular organizations, as well as providing an opportunity to build in greater inclusivity and diversity in how we were conveying some of that information. And what we found in kind of looking at the ways in which we could present this material, there's a wide variety of e-learning content building tools. We opted for one called Articulate Storyboards, which is very widely used within the NHS. And we kind of felt that learning should be presented through a narrative alongside simple animation. And we tried to weave into that animation some of the existing PPN image assets, and also had a number of new ones designed that kind of fitted in with the same kind of theme. And we wanted, diverse and inclusive designs within that. And fundamental to that design was having Paul's input really, and keeping us grounded in language that was going to be appealing and appropriate to the audience. So his involvement was really critical. Paul, would you like to add anything at this point?
I think it's really important to say that when you're doing lived experience work or expert by experience, it's very important not to use just what you know. I'm happy that I'm very lucky to be a member of what's called the Lived Experience Advisory Panel through the PPN, where all the regions send people and get together and we work together. And I'd just like to thank, I know Alison Bryant's on the call from the Northwest, and some of the discussions we have at the lived experience panel, they're so educational, and I think it's important to take not just your view but everybody's views on board, and others in your life. And one of the things I think that is a benefit of sort of explaining you have got mental health conditions is that people do speak to you, and they talk to you about the challenges they've got to receive therapy, or the good things that they've had and the bad things that need improving. So I think that it was an absolute honour to be asked to be involved, but it's not just my point of view. I really must just say that I reach out to a network of people and speak to a network of people about all the things involved in this. So the perspective from the expert by experience, although I was the main collaborator, it's really a joined up thinking from all those other people that I speak to. And yeah, thanks, Alison. You're an inspiration. I must say that in the first place, from the Northwest.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I guess just in the Midlands too, Paul is one of 3 experts by experience that we have supporting us in the Midlands, and Paul's our Midlands representative on that national group on the Lived Experience Advisory Panel. And as you've said, Paul, kind of linking up with all of those kind of regional experts by experience as well is really important to get a really diverse view for us all. So just to give you a bit of a flavour really of some of the content, and I am going to I think quite bravely dive in and do a live demo of the program content in a minute. But this is some of the imagery that we have within the content, and just to illustrate the model overall, you can see here that we've got a course introduction that gives just a background and context to skills transfer and the stages that learners go through. In this model is simple 3-stage kind of model really, preparing, the delivery aspect, and then the post-learning aspect. And we've kind of, as I mentioned before, tried to group the concepts involved in skills transfer into chunks within those 3 stages. But some of them cut across all 3, such as supervision. Clearly there's lots of things that need to be done in the preparation stage around supervision that also run through to the delivery stage, and then also the post-learning, which is really critical, where the ongoing supervision and support that learners get is really important to them becoming a reflective practitioner ultimately. So that's the overall model. We've got those 3 stages. And I guess the overall kind of principle in a way is that we don't just leave the learner to it. There's a much broader context within which they learn and they assimilate their skills, which is kind of neatly summarized through this. This is one of the many slides. I think there's about 80 slides in the program altogether. But this just illustrates how the learner is supported by those kind of three wider circles, their employer and internal stakeholders, the training provider, and then the wider kind of external stakeholders who will shape and influence their practice over time. And one of the ideas that the stakeholder group felt was very important was for the learner to have an anchor person within their learning journey to really help them assimilate and root their practice. And that anchor person could be their supervisor. It could be someone else within their team. It's really dependent on the context and the individuals involved and who's got the right skills to help the learner really understand them. Okay, so before I launch into showing you some of the program, the next steps with this resource are that as we were kind of coming to the final stages of developing it and identifying where it was that we were going to put it. Originally, we were looking to place it on the e-learning for healthcare platform. But with all of the change that's going on within the systems nationally, we felt that the NHS Learning Hub would be the right place to put it. That's the new kind of learning hub that's being developed by NHS England, and I think over time a lot of the e-learning for healthcare resources are going to be migrated over to the NHS Learning Hub. And we kind of felt as part of this project, it would be helpful to have somewhere that it could be sat, because within the Learning Hub, you can create catalogues. So different health and care disciplines can create a catalogue and have a number of resources based within that catalogue. And we kind of felt, developing a catalogue for the psychological professions was something that would be really helpful, particularly during this time of significant change across the workforce. So, not duplicating, but having almost an index and a kind of catalogued resource that may well link to other areas of the NHS Learning Hub or to existing resources that still sit within the e-learning for healthcare catalogue. Or also, external professional body or other learning resources that sits on the internet somewhere. But just having a catalogue of coherent kind of indexed resource would be really useful. So those are going to be some of our next steps in taking forward this work over the next few months. So we've got a stakeholder group ready to sort of start working on that catalogue over the next few months. So in terms of where this resource sits, there's a link to the skills transfer program, which Nicola will paste into the chat. You can access it through using a variety of search terms, and I'm going to give a live demonstration of that now. This is where it could all start to crumble. Hopefully it won't. Are we okay? Can you see my browser? Yeah. Okay, so this is the homepage for the NHS Learning Hub. If you haven't got an account, it's very easy to set up an account to register. If you've got an e-learning for healthcare account, then your credentials will automatically log you in when you click the login button. So the NHS Learning Hub and the e-learning for healthcare hub both connect together and use the same kind of credentials. So if I click on login, I've got my credentials saved within my browser, so they automatically pop up there. So I sign in. You can also sign in actually using Open Athens as well, if you wanted to access that way. Then to search the Learning Hub, if I type in skills transfer, we can see, that search term is linked to a number of catalogues, and there's some direct resources here. So 11 resources. We're the third one down here. You can see developing psychological therapy skills. So if we click on that, gives you some information about the resource. We are going to nestle the resource eventually within a folder on the Learning Hub, but that will be part of the catalogue development that we go through. At the moment, it's a standalone resource on the hub, but then clicking the play resource will open up what's known as a SCORM folder, which is the e-learning content. And this is content that will work on any device. It works on a mobile phone, so you can learn wherever you are, whatever device you want to use. Okay, so I'm going to play some of the sections now for you to just get a bit of a sense of what the program looks like.
Developing psychological therapy skills, transferring training into practice.
Can I just check that the audio is coming through there?
Please take a moment to...
Yeah, great. Okay, so many of you will be familiar with this kind of e-learning resource. It's very easy to use. There's navigation buttons on the top right, also on the bottom right. The menu is up here in the top left. So that opens up and you can see all of the different sections within the menu. And we've set this so that it's not a traditional e-learning course. This is information presented as e-learning. So it's completely open. You can jump around as much as you want. It is set to play through certain sections, and it stops at different points, at strategic points where there's things that open up on the slide that you can press. But we've tried to make it just as easy as possible for people to navigate through. There's no quizzes, no tests that you've got to do. It is just information that we want to try and push out there, and in the most engaging way possible, which is why we've built it as e-learning. So I'm going to show you, I'm sorry about this, Paul, but not wanting to embarrass you, but just to play this section here.
Hi, who am I? And why am I here? I'm the person sitting with you, in person or virtually, listening to you to get help with my mental well-being journey. I am the person who has walked through the door, the person waiting to make that walk, or even the person who has not even realised yet they have to take those steps. When you're learning new skills, please think about me. Or think about any patient you have worked with, and remember that you can and have changed for the better the lives of many people.
I won't play the whole lot. I'll leave you all to watch that at your leisure. But as Paul mentioned earlier, rooting that kind of idea that putting the patient's voice early on in the kind of concept of of transferring skills. You know, we need to remember what it's all about in the first place, and that really gives a helpful kind of reflection. So thanks, Paul, for contributing that video. I'm going to jump to a few little bits just to give you a flavour. So I'll play this one.
Consider who needs to be involved internally to help with practical issues. We have discussed tools that are available, but also consider other teams and departments within your trust who you might want to involve in your project. Quality improvement and learning and development teams may be available to provide support, and you may want to form a project team to oversee and deliver your learning project. Learners progress through a learning process, and as they become more aware of their practice, they feel as though they don't know what they're doing, often referred to as conscious incompetence. They are aware of their limitations, whereas before this point they were blissfully unaware. It is helpful for learners to understand that this is normal and to be expected when learning new skills. The 4 stages of competence model, also known as the conscious competence model, may be helpful and reassuring for learners to be aware of. Managers should understand supervision standards and requirements are defined by the range of accreditation and membership bodies. Anecdotally, skills-focused supervision is often at the bottom of a long list of other supervision areas, such as caseload management, mandatory training, and line management administration. This is particularly a problem when management and clinical supervision are combined and undertaken by the same person. Ideally, dedicated supervision would be provided until skills had demonstrably transferred and unconscious competence had been achieved. With briefer upskilling training undertaken by professionals who don't have dedicated clinical or practice-based supervision, managers should consider whether the supervision arrangements in place are adequate to support these new skills.
Okay, I will leave the demonstration of the programme there. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of a flavour of what we've produced and why we've produced it. And I'll conclude things there. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. As Sunny has put into the chat, this is going to be sat within a psychological professionals catalogue on the NHS Learning Hub. There will be lots of folders within the indexed catalogue that we build. And the idea is that this will be in one folder. We'll include all of the original prompt resources as well for anyone who wants to look at some of the original work that was done. But yeah, thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, James, and thank you, Paul, for a great presentation. One of the things, whilst there may be some questions or thoughts that are coming through the chat, one of the things I wonder whether or not we're able to give our colleagues that have joined us a timescale for when they can access this. Is this up and ready to go now?
It's ready to go. Yes. So I think Nicola will put the link to the program in the chat. It's launched as of today, so it's ready to go. But what we need to do is build a few things around it. There are some references within the program to see different documents within the folder to get certain information, and that's the bit that we will be building in the next few weeks.
Lovely, thank you. So just to confirm, the skills transfer e-learning is now live on the NHS Learning Hub. It has enabled us to preserve some incredibly invaluable information to support the learners to transfer learning into practice, but also resources to really think about it from the position of a supervisor, manager, and wider member of the team. So it's not about creating something that places all the responsibility on the learner to do this all. This is very much a systemic approach that says that if you are going to upskill, if you are going to commit to psychological skills transfer in any organisation, this needs to be a joined up, integrated, well thought through and supported activity. And it is particularly pertinent given the rollout of training that we're seeing across the NHS and the expectations coming through the long-term workforce plan. As James has said, we will be building the resources around this. So again, if you reach out to us, if you're keen to be involved, if there are things that you think actually would be really helpful to be included, please do reach out to us via our PPN email address. What we are also very keen not to do is to duplicate any information that is already out there. So what we are very keen to do is to ensure that we are linking and hopefully curating information for individuals so they can access it in a one-stop shop type of a way, just because information is so scattered and so fragmented across the system as we go. So if you are interested, please reach out and do post questions to us. If you're still on the call, please take a few minutes and do the evaluation, because that would be really helpful. And thank you very much for your support. Thank you, everybody. I've just seen a quick message. I'll go back to Nicole Fawcett. Nicole, it's been designed for everybody. It has not been designed for learners. It has been designed for interested parties who are keen to support psychological skills transfer.
Just looking back through the chat to see if there's anything else we need to pick up there.
There is one from Alison Bryant who asks, re-skills transfer into practice, how many are skills acquired? How are any skills acquired and competencies validated or applied?
So I guess what I would say, Ali, to that point is that the validation of any skills that are acquired would be part and parcel of the responsibility of the trainer and the supervisor to ensure that that is in place. What this programme is looking at are the conditions that are needed to ensure that that happens. So where's the shared responsibility, where's the opportunity, and how can all of those partners work together? Increasingly, what we have found is that you might have a conversation between a learner and a trainer, but actually, is there a conversation between the learner, the trainer, the supervisor, and the practice, the organisational team where the individual is actually based? We've increasingly seen the amount of individuals who are offered continuing professional development will go and undertake courses, but when they come back to the workplace, their ability to put that into practice might be affected by a range of issues. We're hoping that through this resources, we're asking people to think first before they actually go forth on an upskilling programme and make sure that they have those things in place.
And I guess one of the common things there is whether the supervisor has the right skills to provide the supervision that's needed by the learner, which is certainly something I've seen in previous roles.
And that's also why one of the things that is incredibly important is alongside this work is also the development that we have going on, particularly in the West Midlands, for the development of a supervision hub that is looking at exactly the supervision requirements, particularly in relation to psychological therapies for severe mental health conditions training. So putting all of that together, what we're trying to do is build a jigsaw and minimise the gaps, and try and ensure that what we are doing is empowering people who are starting and commencing on learning journeys to have the best possible support available, because ultimately this is all about improving the practice for our service users and communities. And if we can't get this right, then the cynic in me will say, what on earth are we doing?
I think the important thing for the reason I got involved is the very first person that I met on my IAP service has made a massive impact on my life, and that was the person who opened the door, and that was the receptionist, who has now gone on in her career to qualify as a senior PWP and a manager. And I think it's a resource for all. There's bits that anybody can take out of it, whether you're in senior management or not in senior management. I think the ability to dip in and dip out and further your experience and your skills is there for us all, and certainly I'll be dipping in and out of it because there's things that I can be learning from me and how I go about my work as an expert by experience. So yeah, that was a really important factor when I looked at it.
And thanks, Paul, for sharing that, because even though we've linked this very closely, or we've linked this in some ways closely to the Psychological Therapies for Severe Mental Health Conditions program, actually, when you go through the program, that isn't referenced. It is looking at how you would upskill in or skills transfer in any range of skills. We've anchored it within psychological skills, but actually the learning it would generalize to any. So we've had comments and involvement from colleagues within dementia services, within learning disability services. So there's a range of applicability of this, and the skills transfer has been written in that way. So on that note, I think we're coming up to the end of our session. Thank you again to James and to Paul for fronting up on this presentation. And thank you to members of the stakeholder group who are on the call now. And thank you all for joining us. In the last remaining minutes, if you haven't already, please do take a moment to complete the evaluation form. Nick, if you don't mind just putting it in the chat again, please, because it's gone right up. And if there's any more, if there's any queries, comments, if you're interested, and if you're not already a member of PPN Midlands, please email us directly. We have a Twitter handle there as well, although we keep trying to say X, doesn't quite flow quite the same way, does it? And we've got our own regional web pages. All of the slides and the presentations from this week's Psychological Professionals Week will be shared on the PPN website. I think the timelines for that are hopefully by next Friday, because all of them are being uploaded. But in the meantime, thank you for taking the time and your afternoon to join us today, and I wish you well, and I hope to see some of you again very soon. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.